Breadbox Media programming is brought to you by Jack Kane Ford. Find your next Ford Tough vehicle at caneford.com. Woodhill Community Center. Have a hand in the heart of the city. Support their mission with your donations at woodhillcommunitycenter.org. Toyota in Nicholasville Superstore. Online consultants are standing by right now to help you find your next Toyota. Visit toyotaonnicholasville.com. Lexus of Lexington, home of the best-selling Lexus IS. Find yours today at lexusoflexington.com. Introducing the redesigned CatholicSingles.com, featuring new ways that put the spotlight on the person and their faith, not just a profile picture. For the past 20 years, faithful Catholics have used CatholicSingles.com, and the reimagined CatholicSingles.com website is ready to help single Catholics take the next step in sharing meaningful relationships with other faithful Catholics. Remember, CatholicSingles.com for faith, fellowship, and love.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Lisa, Hendey, and Friends. How is it already mid-October? I can't believe it. The month is flying by, and it's been a busy one filled with some fun travel for me and a few great speaking engagements and a real sense of mission this month. And so I hope by the time you hear this, I will have succeeded with a looming deadline that's been hanging over me for a few months. So if you haven't, then if I haven't met that, then pray for me. But hopefully it's already passed by and it's gone and it's all set. So the podcast is always so fun to record, but it's especially fun this week because our guest this week is actually a real life friend of mine and someone who is a really, really special person. And so I'm very happy to welcome to the show this week, Susan Anderson. And Susan is a Catholic wife and a mother of 3 sons and 3 daughters. Her life is filled with quite a lot of variety. She's a helper to her husband with his Christian game business, that's Cactus Game Design, and with the busyness of being a writer, a rosary prayer warrior, and an advocate for an autistic son named Paul. Susan's first book, Paul's Prayers, A Mother's Accounting of Raising an Autistic Son, offers a broad view of her journey with her son and her whole family. And Susan is also a contributing writer for CatholicMom.com and a real life friend of mine. Welcome to the show, Susan.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that we can call each other friends.
It's a real treat. And while I only get to see you maybe once a year, it's always a joy. And I want to thank you for being a part of our family at Catholic Mom. This show is actually part of my own personal work. And so our audience is even a little bit broader. But I know that the work that you've done with Paul is one that touches many, many families out there. And so I'm really happy to have you on the podcast. And the first thing I always like to ask my guests is just to tell us, Susan, a little bit more about your story.
Okay. Well, I wrote this book a few years ago, and my mother-in-law actually helped me write it. She was bedbound and blind, and I was her 24/7 caregiver. She was a very literary person, and it was more of a blessing to me than it was to her. I actually read aloud to her 8 classics, including War and Peace. And, it passed the time for her, but I think it really helped me as a writer, as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, to enrich my life. I don't sit still very long, so unless I was reading to her, I would have never read War and Peace.
You're a real life Audible.
Right. And what I would do is write a chapter, and then I would run it by her, and she was quite literally and figuratively my blind editor, and very close to her grandson, all of her grandchildren, but Paul was particularly the apple of her eye. And so that's a good start to what this book is about.
So in terms of your 6 kids, where does Paul fall into the birth order, and what's his current age?
Paul is our oldest. He's the oldest of 6. Of course, you've already said. We have 3 sons and 3 daughters. And the sons came first, the daughters came second, and I like to joke that we planned that. But, he's 28, and our kids range from 28 down to 18. So we've been really busy. Things have been really intense for a long time.
Do you have a sense when you were pregnant with Paul that there would be a learning anomaly or any kind of clue to this, or was it something that you discovered when he was a child?
I had no idea. He did have the hiccups a lot in utero. I have heard that there's sometimes children like that tend to have allergies. But he was a very sensitive infant, and he being my first, I had no idea. He had crying spells in the afternoons when he was a newborn, and those lasted about 3 months. And I go into that in the book. My mom had sent me an article from a Family Circle magazine at the time. He was born in 1990. And the article said that some babies are very sensitive and their central nervous systems are immature. And so they have these crying spells, usually in the afternoon, and you can't soothe them. You just, of course, they're fed, they're changed, they're loved, and you just have to let them cry it out and check on them and got their back, and that's pretty much what I did.
So when was it that you actually got a clinical diagnosis?
Well, he was 8. When I first, back in 1990, it wasn't well known that that autism was a spectrum disorder ranging from mild to severe. I thought that autism, you either had it or you didn't. My frame of reference for autism was the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, and I know I'm not alone in that. Before 1990, the rates for autism were 1 in 10,000. And then all of a sudden in 1990, the rates jumped to 1 in 500, and my son was the 1 in 500. Now, of course, when he was born in 1990, they exploded. And then people started learning more, but those early assessments that exist now didn't develop until the mid-90s, and he was already 5 by then. So,
yeah, we're contemporaries, and my oldest is a year younger than Paul, but I can share that this wouldn't have been on my radar at all at that age. Definitely not. Right.
And then comparing him to the rest of my children, it just was such a contrast. And things started showing up, when he was a toddler, he was very sensitive. And when he was 4, and I have this chapter in the book called The Grand Silence, and I take that from the monks, mm-hmm. the Grand Silence where they don't talk from 8:30 to 4 a.m. or whatever it is. And I just use that as sort of a pun, but we had a very stimulating Christmas, and we had 3 boys by this time. And Paul was just on, and, very engaged with the whole family. And Rob and I were enjoying that because we were noticing things here and there. But that particular day, Christmas, he was very engaged. And then he didn't speak for 3 days after that. He didn't say one word, and that was frightening. And that was when we started really paying attention and started researching and trying to figure out what was going on.
Were you, did you feel like you had good support around you at that time as far as being a young mom and the help that you were able to get from family and friends?
Well, in a way, people were very compassionate, but nobody knew what was going on. And the pediatrician certainly didn't know what was going on. And they sort of passed it off. And I think people were, at the time, people were so scared of labeling kids. You know, they didn't want to be found liable if they labeled your child with some sort of disability or delay. And so pediatricians were very reticent in saying, oh, well, there's something going on here, because autistic behavior, of course, mimics childlike behavior anyway. And when they're that young, from 0 to 5, it's really hard to tell unless they're very severe. And Paul is on the mild to moderate end of the spectrum. He was very affectionate and verbal. We read stories all the time. We were outside a lot. And he was he could be very passive, but it just wasn't clear. You know, it was just, he wasn't severe. It wasn't like he was having seizures or banging his head on the wall or playing with a fuzzball in the corner. And I said this in my book too. There's an article that I read at the time. We were living in Virginia Beach, the Virginia Beach area. And I read this in the human interest section of the paper. I read this article about this severely autistic boy and his mother, and there was a picture of the two of them, and she just looked exhausted, and he looked exhausted too, but there was this blank, vacant look in his eyes, and it really scared me. But at the same time, and I say this in the book, I was like a Pharisee. I thought, well, at least those aren't my problems, you know. But I think, and one of the questions that you asked was or one of the questions that we've discussed is what I would like people to get from my book, and that's an understanding of what autism really is. My son is mild to moderate. He's an elite runner. He mountain bikes. He does his own laundry. He cooks and cleans and works with us, and he works as a dishwasher twice a week at a restaurant. So he's high functioning, but he's very socially limited, and he can't drive. My husband and I are his legal guardians, so we will always be in the picture, and we are planning for the future. Probably one or more of our children will be supporting him when we are no longer able. And when I think about what I want people to get from this book is autism. There are two ways to look at autism. And I don't go into this too much in the book, but you get it just from, reading a memoir, reading in parables the way Jesus taught you. You think for yourself and you learn a lot. And there are two ways of looking at autism. One is celebrating neurodiversity, meaning autism has always been with us. It's genetic. We just have better diagnosis. And, this is just a different way of thinking, and we need to celebrate it. And if you're on the mild end of the spectrum, sure. If you can still work, you can drive, you can get married, sure, that's easy to do. But autism, and we don't hear about it in the mainstream media. We don't have pharmaceuticals that address autism, but more what autism really is a debilitating whole body disease. It's not just cognitive. It's in the gastrointestinal tract. It's in the nervous system. These children who are adults wear diapers. They have seizures. They don't talk. They scream all day. It's a real problem. And I feel like, Paul, even though this story is very much about him, mm-hmm. he's not the only one.
Yeah. Well, you titled the book. Let's take a step back for a minute. The book is titled Paul's Prayers, a mother's account mm-hmm. of raising an autistic son. And I'm just kind of curious, first of all, why you decided and when you decided to write the book, why this mission to share this personal account?
Well, it's funny because I was actually at a trade show, a Christian retail trade show in 2009, and my husband and I are in the industry, and we see tons of titles that come out every year. And he said, "Hey, go walk the aisles and see what's new," you know. And I did, and I was looking at all the book covers, and I thought, I should write. And so that's when I decided to write, but I didn't know I was going to write about autism. And I started perfecting the craft, reading a lot about how to write. And it was a lot of fun for me, journaling and submitting essays to literary magazines and such, and getting a lot of rejections. And I think that's what the Lord used to show me what I was going to write about. Mm-hmm. And so a few years ago, I thought, there's a need here. You know, we're at 1 in 36 now with children. And the most recent statistic is 1 in 5 children now are special needs. But the reason I decided to call it Paul's Prayers is because my son, Paul, is probably the most spiritually pure, most spiritually intelligent person that I know. And when he prays, everybody listens. And he says what everybody thinks, you know, what everybody's afraid to say. And he's very loud and during Mass and very reverent. Everybody can hear him recite the Nicene Creed. He sings. He's very ritualistic and devoted. He comes up in the morning and dips his fingers in the holy water font, and he says, "Please bless me, Lord, today."
Oh, my goodness.
And then he goes to the coffee pot. So, you know, when he prays, when Rob asks him to pray at mealtime, you know, you're in for, you know, 5-minute prayer, and it covers everything. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So calling it Paul's Prayers is a tribute to that predominant aspect of his personality. That's so beautiful. So I'm wondering how, I guess, you know, when we talk about the things that have been helpful to you in raising not only Paul, but your entire family, what's most helpful and where your faith kind of falls into that range of the things that have supported you in what is surely an incredibly challenging parenting mission.
It is, and thank you for asking. We were evangelical Protestants until the age of 33. My husband and I are both the same age. And being open to life brings more struggles. You know, when you don't have control over your life and you're trusting the Lord with whoever he's going to bring, you know, you start realizing you need more help, and more help than just reading your Bible and having fellowship with other believers. You start realizing there's something missing, and what we were missing were the sacraments. And so we and that's another story all by itself. That may be the next book. But when we were enrolled in RCIA, and we had to wait to receive the Eucharist. I mean, I think you wait for 9 months before you can receive the Eucharist. I was very drawn to the idea, the sacrament of confession, because I felt that as a mother with a special needs child and you know, a large family, and having come from a divorced family home, I just didn't feel equipped. So I was just really trying to draw close to God and trying to figure out what he wanted me to do and how to handle this. So I started praying the rosary, and I was very drawn to the sorrowful mysteries. They were my favorite, which is funny because they're the most morbid. But what Jesus did through his passion and through the crucifixion, it's the only way any suffering, any kind of cross that the Lord puts on our shoulders makes sense. And so it's my faith, and particularly my Catholic faith, and my devotion to the Blessed Mother, that's been in recent years. And just knowing I have a mom, knowing I have a spiritual mom, and I've grown closer to my natural mother and because of it too, I think.
That's so beautiful. And I think as one who's a cradle Catholic and, who's had differing years in terms of the intensity of the practice of my own faith, I always love talking to people who've intentionally chosen this faith because you remind me of the great treasure of what we have and how often we take it for granted. And I think sometimes it is through the eyes of our children that we most beautifully see how much God loves us. Like if we can understand how much love we have for them, and even more so, that's how loved we are by God. That's pretty amazing. It's an amazing
right.
gift.
And even especially Mary, I think, I shouldn't say especially Mary. It's just, I think that Jesus isn't jealous of her. He's not afraid that we're going to love her too much. I think it's St. Maximilian Kolbe said that you couldn't love her more than Jesus does, But the concept of her knowing everything about us, even though she's not divine, she's there. She's the Queen of Heaven. She's the Queen of the universe, Queen of the Church, all that. She knows everything about me, yet she still wants to see me make it, and that's how I am with my own kids. I know a lot about them. I know their strengths. I know their weaknesses. I know the good things they've done and the things that, we protect them from. And I just love them. Mm-hmm. I just want to see them make it. And I 100% agree with you on that, of how much the Lord loves us. And our Catholic faith is, like you said, it's treasure trove. There's just so much there that you can never totally embrace every bit of it until we meet him face to face, I think.
And I think right now where we are in the church in terms of so many of the struggles that we're going through that we can't turn our eyes away from. We certainly pray for victims and for kind of wisdom for leadership in our church. But I feel like right now my prayer life is more fruitful than it's been in many, many years because I'm on my knees, just asking God to help me figure it all out. So I need to come pray I need a retreat with Paul. Speaking of Paul, I'm kind of curious of what he and the other kids think of, the fact that mom is a writer. I certainly know, how my kids feel about that. And I'm curious about how your family has reacted to the sharing of your story in writing and what that's meant for them.
Well, and it's been a mixed bag, everybody's very proud of me. And Paul, I had a lot of anxiety with this book, but I do go into that a little bit. I got his permission to write it in the last chapter, when I was signing the contract with the publisher. And I have a little story. It's kind of cute. I went to New York to the International Toy Fair. My husband and I go there every year in February. It's right there in Manhattan. And I thought, I want to go visit my publisher because they were 2 blocks away from the Javits Center. Wanted to meet my publicist, and this is a first experience for me being published. I even walked there. I tried to get into a taxi, and the taxi cab driver said, "Ma'am, it's right there." You just can walk. So I said, he wasn't going to make any money on me, so I thought, okay, well, I'll walk over there. And when I met my publicist, she gave me an advance reader's copy of the book. This was in February, and the book was to be published, I think it was late March, mid-April. She gave me, the advanced reader's copy, and it was paperback book, of course, beautiful cover, and it is a beautiful cover. We can talk about that in a minute. And I had been having some anxiety about the book with Paul because it's such a personal story, and we live in a small town. just felt like I had to protect him a little bit. If he were more severe, it wouldn't be such an issue. But I just wasn't sure. I was just, and I kept giving it to the Lord. But on the way home, my husband asked me, "Are you going to show the book to Paul?" And I said, "I am." And we are typically in New York almost a week, and it's a long week. And we got home, and we do have support for him while we're gone, but he's also able to stay at home and do most things for himself, so that's good. But I walked in the door, and I said, "Paul, I have something to show you." I showed him the book, and the book, I took the picture from the inside of a lifeguard stand. It's a beautiful cover. It's mostly blue. We were on the at Carolina Beach. It was in November, so there's nobody on the beach. And I took the picture from the inside of the lifeguard stand, and Paul was holding a football, and I told him to turn around, and I took the picture. So you see this young man's back, and then you see this shadow that extends, of course, diagonally because of where the sun was. And they used it, which was a big surprise because usually publishers, I guess when you write you sign the contract, they take over the cover, but they liked it and they used it. So I showed Paul the cover, and he said, "Oh, that's me." And then he pointed to the title, Paul's Prayers, and he said, "My prayers." And he said, "No, Mom, really, that's amazing." And then he hugged me.
Wow.
But I'm still very discreet about the book with him because it's not really his world. It's not really where, he doesn't sit down and watch the news with us, or he watches his own movies. He has his own meals. He needs a lot of space, and he takes care of pets. He's very socially limited. So when we talk about things, it has to be at on a level that he understands. He's still very concrete and very literal about things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just careful about the story. And my kids are great. Mark, in particular, my third son, he told my daughter Katie, he and Katie and Danica share a house out in Wilmington. And he said, sometimes I forget that this is Mom's writing. And he said, it's really good.
Oh.
And he said, sometimes Mom is too much for me to handle in person, which kind of made me sad. Katie told me that. He said, but I can handle this. I can handle her when I read her writing. I can handle the way she communicates when I read her writing. And he said, and I think this is just the beginning for her. So that was...
Oh, what a vote of confidence. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
A huge compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, knowing where they are in their journey, that'll only grow that sense that you have an identity that's linked to them, but also that's uniquely you is really special. One of the questions that I had related to Paul, and you kind of answered a little bit, but I want to just go into it with an eye towards something that you mentioned earlier, which is the fact that, this is unlike the journey that you have with a typical child who, goes off to college and then just gets a job and goes off and lives their life. Your life and Paul's life are intertwined, probably for the length of your life. I'm wondering what his future looks like, and also how other people who aren't just in your immediate family can be of support to you in that journey. Like if we know somebody in our life who has a child with autism, what might you wish that we would know about how we could help you with that journey?
Well, I know, their parents and their children are more severe than mine, and it's so sad. I mean, they feel like they can't die, because who's going to take care of their son or their daughter? But I think we're at the point where push comes to shove type situation, And 87% of autistic adults are unemployed, and over 90% still live with their parents, and they probably always will. But I think what's going, and I'm talking about on a broad scale, and then I'll get to, more personally what I ask of people or what I want them to know. But there's another book that just came out, and hopefully this is going to get people's attention. It's very different than my book, but it's called How to End the Autism Epidemic, and it's written by a man named J.B. Hendey, who has a severely autistic son. And, of course, that's why he's writing about the autism epidemic, and he's calling it an epidemic. And I think it's so much like, I don't know, the first thing I think of is alcoholism. You can't cure it, you can't fix it until you admit there's a problem. And I think as a society, particularly in America, we've got to realize this is a problem. There aren't many group homes. I think there used to be, but they closed them, back in the 60s. And that ties into legislation, which I don't know that much about, but I think it's realizing that we have a real problem with the health of our children, and that we find out what's causing it. And I do believe it's an environmental cause. And that's what, when you ask, how can we help? It's so funny. I went prom dress shopping with my youngest daughter and was telling her about my book and told her about my son. And she said, "What do you think caused it?" And I said, "Well, I think it was probably vaccinations." And I said, "But I know it's environmental. I don't think it's genetic." And she went and she said a cuss word. She said the harsher word of darn. And it just made me feel better. It just made me feel better that she was acknowledging that, when you're a mom, you know what's going on with your children better than anybody else. You just have that intuition that I feel that God gives us. And so on a broad scale, if we recognize this as an epidemic, then we can start doing something about it. Start helping people with employment and independent living and functional skills, to live the best independent lives that they can, or even, supported lives. I used to feel like, why won't anybody help us? Why doesn't anybody care? But I don't feel that way anymore. Everybody in my church is very compassionate. Everybody loves seeing Paul in Mass. And I guess if I would want anyone to help in a way, it would be to be supportive of families who are Catholic, and they're bearing this cross. If it's, hey, let me sit with your son while you go out to eat or something,
right?
Like a good grandparent or something. Yeah, that would be great. And to just be supportive, because I think it's one of the hardest things that exists. I really do.
Well, I think if we're going to call ourselves people who, are champions for life, that's at all phases of life, and that we have to be educating ourselves, but especially reaching out to people who've, been dealt challenging circumstances, and recognizing the dignity of a life like Paul's, and the need for your family to have love and support and encouragement, and, to help him find his way through life as well. I think that what you share. I love the aptness of the title, and I love the vision of him on the cover. I'm a big fan of walking on the beach, and so I'll think of him next time I'm out there.
Oh,
and I'd ask you to ask him to pray for me because I need some prayers right now. I think a heart like Paul's is very beloved by God and very close to God. So that's a good witness for us to have in our lives. It's a beautiful thing. And I can't wait to see what comes next for you with your writing, because I'm like your kids. I think you're just getting started. So,
that's nice of you to say that.
I can't wait to see.
Thank you.
So, Susan, as we get ready to move on and let you get back to work, what are some of the ways that you'd like for people to connect with you, and how I know that they can get a hold of the book? We're going to have links in our show notes, but how can people connect with you and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Well, I would love it if they'd follow me on Facebook. I have an author page called Susan L. Anderson author page. And I think the handle or the ID is at Susan Anderson Writes. I think that's how it is.
And don't worry, because we'll definitely have a link in our show notes. So they'll be able to just come to my website, lisahendey.com, and get the link there.
Okay. And I am on Twitter. I'm not as diligent about Twitter, but I'm also on Instagram. Instagram's a lot of fun for me. It's at Susan Swims. Oh, fun. And that's and I am public. So, you can follow me if you'd like to do that. And I post all kinds of stuff. I post pictures of family and nutrition. I'm really into that lately. And I often post pictures that have to do with devotion to Jesus and Mary.
Beautiful, all worthy things. And are there any kind of closing thoughts or anything that we haven't talked about that's significant to you to want to make sure people hear from you before we let you go?
Well, I'd love it if people would read my book, and they can get it on Amazon. And the full title is Paul's Prayers, A Mother's Account of Raising an Autistic Son. You can get it on Amazon. You can also get it at Barnes & Noble, and I want to see Barnes & Noble stay in business. I think they're a fabulous organization, and they've been very welcoming. I've got a book signing down in Florida at the Jensen Beach Barnes & Noble, October 20th. So if you're in that area, I'd love if you'd come meet me. I'd love to meet you. And also, you can ask for it in your independent bookstore. They can get it through their usual distributors. And your Catholic bookstores, they should have it too. And I would love it if people would go, patron their Catholic bookstores, whether they're online or brick and mortar stores, either one.
And this book is a recipient of the Catholic Writers Guild Seal of Approval, which is not an easy thing to get. So it's a hallmark of this book that it's not only important, but also well written and reliable with respect to the faith aspects of the book. Susan, I'm so happy that we got to have this time together. And I know I'm going to have you on again, because I know you're going to have another book in the future. But I just want to thank you for your friendship. And I'd say to my friends that are out there listening that, you heard the numbers that Susan has expressed to us, the statistics of autism. And it's very likely that someone in your life, you may or may not know this, but it's very likely that someone in your life is walking this path. And so even if you think for yourself, well, I don't, have a child who's going through this, by reading Paul's Prayers, you're armed with what you need to be of support to your loved ones. And I just encourage you to get this book, because you'll be blessed by it, but also because we need resources like this for the families who struggle with this. So when publishers see that a book like this is getting a good reception, they will create more resources, which ultimately will help us to surmount the battle that we're up against here.
Right, absolutely. Right. That people know that they're not alone. I mean, I think that's what I want people to get most from my book, even if they're not facing autism. Maybe they're facing cancer or, another debilitating disease. Autism isn't the only one. I know that.
And frankly, maybe you're just facing parenting a teenager. You need some extra support and perspective.
Right.
That could be a challenge.
And that I know we're wrapping this up, but I had forgot to mention that the book is, you may not be particularly interested in autism, but it's so much more than that. It is about having a large Catholic family in a rural mountain setting, growing up Catholic in an area that's not particularly used to Catholics, and so there's a lot of scenery in it and a lot of prose, and I try to be humorous, and each chapter is pretty much a self-contained essay. So if you jump in the middle and you want to read about stress and how I deal with that, you don't have to start at the beginning. You can just read that chapter about stress, say, for instance.
Susan, it sounds like your life could be either a beautiful motion picture or a sitcom, too. So
I'll let you think that.
I might get working on that one. Well, again, our guest today has been Susan Anderson, and Susan is the author of this beautiful book, Paul's Prayers, A Mother's Account of Raising an Autistic Son. It's available in brick and mortars, your local Catholic bookstore, or online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And again, for folks living in that nearby community, you can go out to that book signing. We'll have information in our show notes about how to follow Susan, how to like her Facebook page, and everything you need to be supported in this journey. Susan, thank you so much for your time, and especially for being Paul's mom.
Oh, thank you. And thanks, Lisa, for reading my book and giving me a really nice endorsement.
Oh, it's an honor. It's an honor. And friends, that is it for this week's show. We always are looking for your input on what you'd like to hear. I love making new friends, so suggest a guest or let me know what you'd like to hear on the program. If you have enjoyed the podcast, I would love it if you could share it with a friend. One thing that's really helpful is if you just kind of go over to iTunes or wherever you're listening and leave us a star review or a little statement about the show. That helps us to spread the word and helps us to continue to grow. I want to thank my friends over at Breadbox Media for being our home for the podcast, and to our sponsors who make it possible for us to bring you this show each week. I'm just so grateful. And until next time, come on over and visit me at lisahendey.com for information about Susan, the books, and everything you need to know. Be my friend at Lisa Hendey on social media. And then just go out and do something awesome this week. Have a great week, friends. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Breadbox Media. Find more about us at breadboxmedia.com.